Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's Happiness Hour. Happiness Hours are our monthly events for members of the Conspiracy of Goodness Network. Each month, we talk to one of our co-conspirators, usually the doers in the Conspiracy of Goodness. And this month, we are delighted in our thematic understanding of how we reduce plastic waste and our impact on the environment to talk to Nathan Robinson, who is a marine biologist and science communicator. He first made global headlines when the video of him removing a plastic straw from a sea turtle nose went viral and inspired an entire generation, I would say an entire global movement to end single-use plastic and to change the way we, major corporations, people who are not even close to the oceans, thought about our impact on the oceans. And then he's gone on to create even more incredible projects using video technology to capture the world's eye view from the perspective of a sea turtle and be able to look into the eye of giant squids at the bottom of the ocean. It is truly incredible what Nathan has done. And we have had the opportunity at Ever Widening Circles to talk to him a few times. He gave us an interview talking about the giant squid video, which was incredible. Go check that out on the website, as well as he was on the Now Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. Every time we say it's like talking to our cousin who just loves marine biology, you feel like a part of the family now, Nathan. Thank you so much for joining us for this Happiness Hour.
Thank you. I'm incredibly excited. I also actually had an interview with you guys about predatory sea snails,
Yes.
which is a completely tangential part of my marine biology work, but it's also a pretty cool one.
I thought, I mean, and you brought up several points that Sam was telling us about that. All of a sudden, it made predatory sea snails seem like something that would be like the fundamental basis of a good ecological education for any child. In any case, we appreciate that you as a science communicator have made some of the world's biggest, most out there seeming problems hit home and actually make tangible change in the world. And I'm so excited to talk to you today about your work and about your journey through your work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's always a pleasure to have to talk to you and the team, you and the family, let's say. You did a wonderful job of introducing my background, and it was a really nice summation of what I'm going to talk to you about today. Today, I'd love to give you a 20-30-minute chat about my background in environmental education and science communication, and how I tie those both together. So I'm going to try and share my screen, see if this works. Does everyone see that?
I see it.
Hey, awesome. So, I guess, as you know, I'm a marine biologist, and I'm a very, very lucky marine biologist in lots of ways. And one of those ways is through my work, I've been able to travel to some of the remote tropical beaches around the world, working largely with nesting sea turtles, protecting the adults and their eggs. I've also been lucky enough to travel in submarine to the bottom of the oceans, not the deepest point, but I've traveled to the bottom of the Caribbean Sea, and it's an experience I'll never forget. And during these little adventures, I've made lots of discoveries, and I've told lots of stories. And two of those stories in particular were actually picked up by a wonderful marine organization called Ocean X. And at the end of 2020, they did a breakdown of their 10 largest marine biology stories of the decade. And it was an absolute honor to be nominated as the person behind two of those. So what I would like to talk to you now is kind of the background behind those stories, but also the lessons that I learned along the way about engaging audiences and trying to make our oceans a better, healthier place. Okay, so it all began as kind of many stories do. I've always loved the ocean, and the clear path to me growing up was to study marine biology. So I went to the University of Southampton in the UK, and I studied for a degree in marine biology, and I I'm not going to say I didn't like it, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. I had this vision in my head that I was going to sign up to a marine biology degree, and within a week, 2 weeks tops, I was going to be rubbing shoulders with David Attenborough and saving seals and saving all the marine world. And it's just not the way that the world works. And I was trying to find evidence of my life at university to add a couple of photos to the slides, and all I could find was this photo of me trying to hide in as many buckets as possible. It's pretty difficult to try and figure out where I start and where I end, but I think that sums up that my head wasn't really in it. So I decided if I really wanted to start trying to make a difference, I'd have to get out there myself. And what I chose to do was I chose to get a summer job with an organization called Archelon, the Sea Turtle Protection Society of Greece. We were building campsites in several areas around Greece. You can see some of the photos in the bottom right-hand corner. We were spending our days walking up and down nesting beaches, looking for nesting sea turtles so we could protect them from invasive species or human development and things like this. And I fell in love. That was what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to be doing hands-on conservation. I wanted to be outside. I wanted to be having an impact. It spoke to me. I fell in love with my job immediately, and I kind of kept pursuing that. I worked for that organization for several years. I eventually got offered a job for another organization in Costa Rica called the Leatherback Trust. I worked for them, basically doing the same thing, protecting sea turtles in Costa Rica. I ended up getting my PhD in sea turtle biology, simultaneously to doing this conservation work. But everything all kind of changed someday in 2015. I was still based, just finished my PhD, but I was still based in Costa Rica. And I had been invited aboard a research expedition on the Pacific coast with Texas A&M University. And I was invited on this expedition that was led by a wonderful marine scientist, Dr. Christine Figuener. And I was invited on the expedition because I was an expert in sea turtle epibionts. Epibionts are animals that live on other animals, and sea turtles tend to be covered in them. And you can see in this top right-hand image, there's a olive ridley turtle there, and all those little white things, those are barnacles, crustaceans, similar to crabs, that actually live on the bodies of these animals. So I was studying them, which meant that every time we were looking out for sea turtles, every time we brought a sea turtle onto our boat, I would peer over them, looking for all these critters that were living in their nooks and crannies. But for one individual, we found something and we had no idea what it was. I'm sure some of you have a bit of an inkling already, but I'm just going to show this video. This is an edited version. This is a lot shorter than the full video. The full video is actually about 8 minutes. What we found is we found something stuck in the sea turtle's nostril. I initially thought it was a tube worm. Sometimes these animals have these worms that have little shells that live on the carapace. And I thought one had just unfortunately got stuck in that sea turtle's nose. But when we pulled it out, we realized it was something completely different. We realized it was a plastic drinking straw. It was this plastic drinking straw, which I keep by me as a little kind of memento and reminder. But that wasn't the only event of that nature that we saw. About 2 months later, had a very similar experience. I was working on a nesting beach this time. I wasn't working in water, but I was working with the same species of sea turtle about 20 kilometers, like 15K or so away from that first encounter. And we found the exact same thing. We found something wedged in the nostril of a sea turtle. But this time, it wasn't a straw. This time it was a plastic fork. It was stuck via the tines, the head of the fork, directly into the nose. Now, no one up until this point had observed, we knew that sea turtles were ingesting plastic, but no one had observed plastic getting wedged in the nostrils of these animals. And we actually think it was to do with them trying to eat plastic and then trying to regurgitate it. And instead of passing through the mouth, it gets passed into the inside, your internal nostrils, then those items are getting wedged in the nose. And a great example of that was given by the fork. There's no way that head of the fork could have got stuck in a sea turtle's nose. The handle had to be coming and passing out through the nose. It's the only way it was going to work. So, because this was a relatively novel interaction between a plastic item, plastic pollution, and sea turtles, we wrote up both of those events into 2 separate scientific articles. And we published them in scientific journals. And I checked one of them out sometime last year. Keep in mind, this is 4 years or so after the event, on a website that aggregates scientific papers. And it had been read, as you can see by that red arrow, around 1,500 times. But as many of you know, that's not really where these videos had the biggest impact. The biggest impact wasn't scientific. The biggest impact really happened on social media. The 2 original posts for the straw and the fork, when combined, were shared 60,000 times. The videos combined together have something over 150 million views now. They were picked up by pretty much every single major news source in the world: National Geographic, Telegraph, New York Times, Al Jazeera. They helped to instigate countless anti-plastic, anti-single-use plastic, anti-straw campaigns around the world. We skipped straw, last straw movements. It became the kind of focal point of a feature-length documentary on the environmental impact of straws, called Straws. And that was the first nomination I received for one of the biggest marine biology stories of the past decade. And this really changed my worldview. I had spent up until this point, the last kind of 10 years or so, focusing on protecting sea turtles. And I was trying to do it by hand. I was mainly, say, working on nesting beaches where I might be protecting eggs or protecting the adults. But I started realizing that the impact of those videos was so extensive that it was really, I mean, this is a little bit of a hyperbole, but it was really starting to change the world. All of a sudden, it started to become difficult to see this kind of, the image that you see of the Friends cast up here. You'd go into restaurants around the world, bars around the world, and all of a sudden, plastic straws weren't just being handed out anymore. It was something that was becoming a hot topic. People were discussing. People were actively going up and saying, like, no, I don't want straws. People were making a stance about their opinion on how we're treating the planet based on, okay, I'm going to say no to plastic, cut single-use plastic out of my life. And I started thinking, if I really want to work towards protecting our oceans, conserving our oceans, I need to use this. So seeing the impact of a single image or a single video, I decided to start incorporating new camera or video technologies into the research that I was doing. And my goal being, if I start to incorporate cameras into the research that I do, I can not only collect valuable ecological data about the animals that I'm studying, but I can also collect footage that I could then use to raise awareness about global marine issues. And what I'd like to talk to you about now is 3 examples where I've tried to build that into my own research. One is putting cameras in the sky through drones. 2 is actually putting cameras temporarily onto animals. So we call these animal-borne cameras. And 3 is putting cameras in the deep sea. Now, drones are wonderful pieces of technology. And in the last decade or so, they've been commercialized to the point that they're relatively available to ecologists and scientists like off the shelf. You can walk into a store, buy a drone, and be using it to do research within the day. So it's opened up provided a brand new tool for us to study lots of species, and it's particularly useful in shallow marine environments because it enables us to get an aerial viewpoint where we might be able to see wildlife in a way that we've never been able to see wildlife before. This is particularly useful in conducting quick assessments of habitats if we want to count how many animals there are, or we want to start observing animals in a new way where we might want to record, say, their natural behaviors. When if we're snorkeling next to them, they might not be behaving as naturally as if we have a drone up in the air they can't see. So I started incorporating drones into my research, and I've been conducting research on everything from kind of whales to turtles, of course, to crocodiles. And I wanted to share with you a quick clip series of some of my favorite videos that I've recorded from my time working with drones. So this is a humpback whale and its calf. You'll see its calf pop up just, there we go, next to the mother. This is us just to highlight a wonderful mangrove habitat where we were looking for crocodiles. And this is an American crocodile. We actually were able to record swimming. This is in the open ocean. This is swimming along the front of a popular surfing beach. And then this is one of my favorite shots. This is a shot of a leatherback sea turtle. I think this is actually one of the first drone images that anyone was ever able to record of these animals. And then this is the final shot. This is just one of the beaches that we, one of the sea turtle nesting beaches in Costa Rica, where we patrol, like you can see those people there, looking for sea turtles every day to try to protect those nests and the hatchlings. Okay, so we had some success in raising awareness about kind of marine issues through these videos. We had a couple of stories that came out, notably National Geographic wrote a story on some of our work to do with the leatherback turtles and some of our work to do with some other sea turtle species. We were picked up by the Telegraph in the UK. But I now want to move on to arguably one of my favorite of the new projects, which is the Animal Born Camera project. And the whole idea was it kind of spawned from watching too many YouTube videos of people doing crazy things with cameras strapped to their heads, and started making me wonder, like, can we just do this with marine marine animals? I want to know what does it look like for a turtle to swim through its habitat, with the idea that if we can start to figure out what these animals see, this is going to provide us wonderful information about their habitats, what they feed on, but also the threats they face. Are they encountering plastic in the ocean? Are they encountering fisheries? Like what the issues these animals face? So we developed something called the Turtle Cam, which was a paralens camera, so a dive camera, very similar to a GoPro. And we glued a bunch of things onto it, including a bunch of that red float is actually old buoys that we carved out and glued to the back to make sure that the camera was positively buoyant, so it floated, so we could find it after it popped off. And we attached the cameras using corrodable links, so links that after a certain period of time just corroded and popped off to the surface. And we're able to record some absolutely wonderful footage. We spent about 2 years deploying these cameras on sea turtles in the Bahamas. And this is some of the footage that we have to share. As you can see, the water quality is absolutely fantastic in most instances. We got so much data about sea turtles interacting with other sea turtles. We actually didn't realize how social these animals were, but most of our videos involve sea turtles. Sometimes it's friendly, sometimes it's aggressive, but nearly always interacting in some way. Lots of footage of other beautiful, lots of other beautiful species. And I think this is my favorite clip because it's kind of stupid, but I just liked that one turtle not really respecting the other turtle's personal space. Well, this project started getting picked up by an even bigger audience. We got a really nice coverage from Great Big Story and Mission Wild, 60-second documentaries, which is a largely kind of social media based entity, covered us, CNN, The Independent, UK, got some really nice coverage. Now I want to move on to the final project, which is putting cameras in the deep sea. The deep sea, which we generally consider is habitats below around 1,000 meters, so 3,000 feet, is actually the largest habitat on this planet. So about 2/3 of the world is ocean, and then about 2/3 of the ocean is the deep sea. So if you wanted to compare the deep sea to the rainforests, the coral reefs, temperate forests, anything like this, the deep sea is the biggest habitat easily on this planet. But we know very little about it. I'm sure plenty of you have heard this idea, this concept, and we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the deep sea. And there's a couple of reasons we don't know that much about the deep sea, but one of them is it's a very difficult environment to study, and it seems very alien to us. And one reason is it's perpetually shrouded in darkness. Sunlight can only penetrate the first 200, 300, 400 meters of the water column. Below that, sunlight can't penetrate any further, which means it's in perpetual night. It's always dark in these habitats. Now, this may lead some of you to think that the animals living in these habitats wouldn't have any use for eyes. If there's no light, then you don't need to use your eyes for anything. But evolution for the majority of animals has actually worked in reverse. What it's done is it's given the deep sea species some of the most sensitive eyes in the animal kingdom. And one of the reasons why, even though it's incredibly dark and there's no natural sunlight, why it's very valuable to have eyes, is because over 50% of life in the deep sea creates its own light. They bioluminesce, and bioluminescence is light created by organisms. Think like fireflies bioluminesce. Now, because the animals in the deep sea have such sensitive eyesight, an absolutely wonderful scientist, who I think you might be able to see in the bottom right-hand corner, called Dr. E.D. Witter, had an incredible idea several years ago. We knew there were lots of big animals in the deep sea, but we didn't ever seem to be recording them on camera. And she was wondering why that was. Her idea, her hypothesis, was generally when we go exploring the deep sea, and we take our submarines or our little deep sea robots, we come with loud noises and bright lights. Loud noises from the motors of the submarine or the robot trying to navigate to this habitat, and bright lights to pierce through that inky darkness to see what's around us. But her thought was, if these animals are so attuned to bright lights, then perhaps they're seeing us long before we're seeing them, and they're just staying away. They're not even coming close. So she decided to design something called the Medusa. The Medusa is that kind of square box with the yellow lid that you can see in a couple of those images. And the Medusa was unique because it was a stealth camera. The idea was, instead of using bright white lights, it used very dim lights. And it also didn't use white, it used red. Now, the reason that ED picked the color red was because most deep sea organisms, in fact, most marine organisms, don't see red light very well. They see light at the blue end of the spectrum, and even sometimes further into the ultraviolet end of the spectrum, parts of colors that we can't even see, they can see those. But red lights, most marine animals can't see very well. So if you shine a red light, you can see life around you, but the life can't see you. So she added red lights, and then she added one other little neat contraption, which was, knowing that most deep sea life creates bioluminescence, what better way to try to attract some of these big predators in by creating a bait based around this bioluminescence. Animals that feed based on scent, sharks, you can just chop up some, say, dead fish or some meat, put it in a cage, that'll attract a shark. But animals that hunt by eyesight, they need something visual. So she designed something called an e-jelly, which was an LED display that made a little pinwheel pattern that mimicked the bioluminescent display of a deep sea jellyfish. She strapped that on the front of the Medusa, and she started dropping that in the ocean in various places. Now, a couple of years ago, Edie and I had the opportunity to start collaborating together on some of these deep sea exploration projects. And we went to the Gulf of Mexico and we deployed the Medusa in several locations. And what we found was something completely unexpected. This is a species that can only really be described as a sea monster. It blows my mind when I think that this is a species that people have known about for millennia. Like, it's described in Norse mythology, it's discussed in movies and books. It's such a culturally important species. Generally, it's referred to as the kraken. As scientists, we refer to it as the giant squid. But even though the species is so globally known and culturally important to us, it's only ever been caught in camera once before. And we recorded the second ever footage of the species alive in its natural habitat, the first ever footage of its kind in the US. So I'm going to play you that video now. Now, if my internet connection works, you'll see that little pinwheel lure at the front, and then you'll see the giant squid approaching from behind. I love that video. Yeah, so that was it. We recorded the giant squid on camera, and we decided to share this story, and it was actually picked up by the New York Times. New York Times did a story on the second ever sighting of giant squid, the first time in US waters, and it was picked up by 400 other international, or at least 400 other international news stories. And this is what gave me my second nomination for the 10 most important marine biology stories of the past decade. Now, as I mentioned, I've been very lucky. Like, there's some science behind the stuff I do, but a lot of it just comes down to being in the right place at the right time, and I always have to acknowledge that. But luckily, that my luck has given me the opportunity to learn some important lessons, and I'd like to talk to you now about some of the lessons that I've learned on my journey in science communication. And number one, I mean, if I wanted to make any recommendation for anyone trying to get into this field, is turn your images into stories. And what I mean by that is, I honestly don't think that's the image itself that's important. It's not how cool your image is that engages people. It's the story that helps to engage people. It's the context. Context is absolutely central. And a great way to explain this is, I think, in terms of quality of the imagery, some of the best footage I've ever been able to record was probably from that drone project. Yet that is some of the kind of least engaging footage, admittedly, that I've recorded. In contrast, the giant squid is black and white, pixelated footage. If I just showed you that without explaining the importance behind that video, I don't think it would turn that many heads. But when you provide the background, you provide the story, it takes on this whole different meaning. And the same thing is true for the straw video. The straw video, just seeing the sea turtle up close, or even seeing an animal interacting with plastic, has a potential to be a powerful imagery, but part of what made it so engaging was the story. It was the struggle. It was you didn't know what the item was. Seeing what the item was at the end kind of built a bit of a story of mystery. The context between, like, why it had a straw in its nose, and how our actions can be affecting kind of the impact of plastic on marine life, things like this, all tied in with the context. So when you're trying to share stories, when you're trying to make a difference, I think it's important to think about context even more so than the imagery you're trying to collect and the quality of that imagery. Lesson number two that I've learned is not to underestimate your audience. I think we often think, especially in the environmental educational world, we think of our jobs as trying to inform the world about some of these big global threats, climate change, plastic pollution, unsustainable fisheries. And we see our jobs, we need to share this information, because when people have this information, then they'll start to make the necessary changes in their lives to start to address these issues. But I actually think this sells ourselves and the science kind of communication community a little short. I honestly think we've done a really good job globally at raising awareness around these issues. And this ties in with actually some of the conversations we're having before this meeting started, is the generations today understand climate change, and they understand the impact of plastic pollution on the ocean, and they understand the impact of where your food comes from and what food you're eating and consuming. The foundations are there. What these audiences want is they now want like support to fight those fights. They want the stories that help them turn around and convince other people that we need to reduce our dependence on single-use plastics, and we need to start feeding ourselves in a more sustainable way, and we need to start reducing our CO2 input. That's what people are hungry for. They want the images that tell those stories. We don't longer, I think we need to put less emphasis on the foundational kind of environmental education, and more just giving people the necessary, for lack of a better word, ammunition to fight these fights that they want to fight. That's important. And I think that is where you start to see some of these videos go viral, because it helps people share these really important messages. And then finally, the last lesson that I like to share with people is that I honestly think most of us, pretty much everyone on this planet, already has all the necessary capabilities to start sharing stories on a global scale today. Now, admittedly, my work focuses on developing new technologies for marine exploration. That tends to be what I do, and not everyone has the capacity to deploy cameras on sea turtle shells or deploy cameras to the bottom of the ocean. That's what I focus my time and effort into. But the most impactful story that I've ever told was that story of the sea turtle with a straw inside its nose. And that was actually recorded on a point and click camera. This is, I don't think anyone on the boats that day when we recorded this video even had a smartphone. This is kind of even before those became completely ubiquitous. What we all have access to now, with 99% of us have access to smartphones, internet, we're all connected on social media. And there's lots of downsides that I'm sure people can talk about at length to the kind of the way that social media and technology is really integrated into our lives. But it's an incredible tool as well. Having a phone in your pocket with access to the internet and a camera essentially gives you the capacity to change the world, and has put that capacity, that power in your hands. So what I always like to turn to my audiences and say at the end of my talks is, you have the capacity to change the world. You just need to start sharing the stories that you want to share to start making the change that you want to see. So knowing that you have that power, what stories do you want to tell? With that, I have to acknowledge that everything I've mentioned today is nothing that I can take kind of sole responsibility for. It's been part of huge collaborations with thousands of dedicated, hardworking people and wonderful institutions, of which only a handful are listed here. But a heartfelt thanks to everyone who's kind of joined me along this journey. With that, I would love to hear everyone's inputs and answer any potential questions. If anyone wants to contact me kind of offline, my email is nathanjackrobinson@gmail.com, or you can follow me at wild.blue.science on Instagram or YouTube. So with that, I'll thank you again for your patience, and I guess we'll move to questions.
I'm just talking away over here with myself muted. Thank you so much, Nathan, for giving this incredible talk to us.
My pleasure.
I think that just to sort of sum it up, and from what I'm thinking, and I can't wait to open it up to others to ask their questions, which you can either put in the chat or just kind of raise your hand to ask directly. You know, I think that what you ended on is so powerful, that we all have the power to change the world in our pocket, and it's really a matter of sharing that stuff. When we look at the stuff that we do, the biggest thing we tell people to do at the end of any of our call to actions is just share. We have to share signs of goodness and progress. We have to share world changing ideas, or else work like yourselves, work like us, work like everything in this conspiracy of goodness network, it stays in obscurity unless somebody presses the share button.
Completely. I 100% agree. And we can think about like in terms of our global impact on the world, and we can start to if you are able to say give up all single-use plastics right now, then you'll reduce the amount of plastic going into the ocean by this much. But if you're able to convince 3 or 4 people to reduce their dependence on, say, plastic bags or plastic straws or plastic cutlery by this much, that can actually make collectively a bigger impact than one person alone just cutting their dependence of these items. And because that sharing is key. The communication is what makes this into a global movement. And to address global problems, you need global solutions. You're not fixing the issue of, say, climate change is never going to be solved by one person in a bubble. It is almost by definition a global response that will be required to address these issues. So yes, I fully agree. Share, and not just share online. Talk about it. Like I think there's a huge room for. We all get our news nowadays from social media, and that is what it is. But a great way to start sharing this knowledge is just start discussions. Just when you're sitting down with your friends and chatting in the evening or doing whatever you do, start to talk about these stories, get the conversation going, get people thinking, provide critical feedback on what you've seen and how you think you can incorporate it into your life. And I think that's an incredibly effective way to start sharing these very important stories.
One of the questions I have, it seems like you've worked in a lot of places across languages. Do you think the power of the imagery, the power of the storytelling lies in the fact that it's very often a medium that can cross language barriers? Like when we talk about solving a global issue, I mean, we have to be able to communicate with the same language. What is the power of imagery to do that?
I think I've honestly never really thought about it in that way before, but I think that's incredibly true. The beautiful thing about lots of the, say, video contents that I've spoken about today, it's international. There is everyone can appreciate it. You don't need to speak a specific language or be from a specific culture to be inspired by a sea turtle swimming through the ocean. So I do think those kind of videos have the potential. They don't necessarily, they engage people in a different way, like the way we speak and the way we communicate can send different messages. But it also has, by taking kind of communication out of it, language out of it, it actually makes it even more international and can share stories across cultures, across boundaries.
Love it. So Louisa asked a question, and I know that you can not really answer this one, but maybe generally, is what are you working on currently? And also, how large would that squid have been?
Okay, wonderful. The squid, we estimate, was around 6 meters.
Wow.
So that's from the tip of its mantle, like the tip of its body, to the end of its tentacles. Now, about 1/3 of that 6 meters, so 18 feet, is the body of the squid, And then you have the squid's arms, which are another 2 meters. And then they have 8 arms and 2 tentacles. And those tentacles are even longer. And that's another 2 meters, 6 feet. So yeah, 18 foot, 6 meters is how to answer that question. To talk about what I'm doing next, I can't get into some specifics, but I can tell you generally. The 2 main projects that I'm very interested in right now is, number 1 was the turtle cam. So the turtle cam project started in the Bahamas, and I picked the Bahamas. Well, I was in the Bahamas at the time, but one of the main reasons why I was so excited to run that project there was because it was crystal clear turquoise waters. I knew the footage I was going to be able to collect was going to be gorgeous. It was just going to be wonderful. But now I've actually had my success in sharing those videos, getting people talking and sharing this imagery. I'm really excited about the idea of doing the same project in a less pristine environment. We've started doing some turtle cam work recently where I'm based now in the Mediterranean. And we have a lot more polluted waters. The water's not as murky. We have a lot more interactions with fisheries from the turtles. And I'm excited to start to tell that story from a different angle. I often imagine, we luckily haven't seen this yet, but I often imagine what it's going to look like when we start recording footage of, say, sea turtles swimming through plastic bags and eating plastic items from the perspective of the sea turtle and things like this. And I think that would be very impactful images. So that's one thing. The other thing is we've recently redesigned our deep sea camera. There's the second version of the Medusa. The Medusa, even though it's wonderful, it's 10-year-old technology. And anyone who, 10 years ago, there was the GoPro 1 had just come out, and now we're at the GoPro whatever, and the changing technology, camera technology is huge. These leap forwards in camera technology have spread throughout the whole kind of camera industry. We can now take what once was a kind of ungainly, like couple of 100 pounds, the Medusa, a couple of 100 pounds objects with bad resolution, like 540p or whatever resolution, some funky ISO values going on in there. Sometimes the images were way too kind of blown out and auto white balance was off. We can now actually compact that whole device into something that's, 30, 40 pounds. Wow. Is you can chuck in a more or less in a duffel bag. The imagery is going to be a lot more crisp. It's going to be kind of 4K imagery, and we can use lower light levels as well because these cameras are so sensitive. So I'm very excited. We've just built these cameras. We haven't been able to deploy them yet, but I'm super excited to start getting those cameras in the water and see what else there is to find.
Oh, wow. Now, one of the questions I have, I was just going to ask this question is, did you capture, what other things did you capture? I can imagine you're probably watching a lot of like footage of like plankton rolling by. I mean, what other things are these? And I'm sure like, the giant squid is obviously very interesting, but I'm guessing that you ran across some other interesting things, in your footage along the way.
Yeah. No, everything you said is completely right. 90%, I say 99% of what we record is marine snow, which is, if you're in the deep ocean, all the organic matter from the surface basically just floats down. And what it looks like is it just looks like white, flaky snow perpetually. So I have hours and hours and hours of marine snow. It's cute. It's a little boring, but it's cute. But we've seen plenty of footage of deep sea sharks, deep sea shrimp, a bunch of deep sea invertebrates. My favorite one, the favorite thing we've also recorded as well, and we recorded on the same mission. We had another first on our mission in the Gulf of Mexico. It wasn't just first footage of a giant squid. We got the first ever in situ footage, so kind of in the moments happening footage of a deep sea shrimp spewing bioluminescent vomit, more or less. So this requires a little bit of context. I told you that over 50% of deep sea life creates their own light. There's a bunch of deep sea shrimp, some of them are actually quite large, so I'll get to this kind of size, that when they get startled, they have these pouches at the side of their mouth that ejects like a plume of neon blue bioluminescent stuff into the water. And the idea being, if something is attacking the shrimp, their defense is vomits neon stuff all over it. And it kind of disorientates their attacker. And that way the shrimp can get away. People know that shrimp can do this because we've caught shrimp in nets at depths, brought them to the surface, prodded them with a stick, and they've done their stuff. No one's actually ever seen it live. And we got something like, we recorded it 14 times or something. These guys are vomiting or spewing all over the place. But yeah, that's I think actually that might be my favorite discoveries we made in that entire trip. It's actually, personally, it's up there with the giant squid quite happily.
I love that, because I think one of the things we forget when we look at all these scientific discoveries, and I realized this when I was watching, there's a great thing called Nautilus Live, which is like kind of, you can watch live the deep sea exploration. I'm a nerd who absolutely loves watching Nautilus Live just for fun. Go watch it. My favorite part is that the scientists are doing live commentary as if it's a football game. And they get so excited when they see these odd behaviors or a new thing in unexpected places. And I can only imagine the energy and excitement when you do see that to be, I mean, there's a sort of element of curiosity. You wouldn't be sitting on a boat for hours or watching rain snow if there wasn't something in you that was almost of like, I don't want to say childlike wonder, because shouldn't be childish that we adults get so excited about spewing shrimp, but just like a pure sense of joy when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, number one is you don't end up on these expeditions unless you're a huge nerd for this kind of stuff. Like, the people who get on these expeditions, the people who've been working in whatever deep sea habitats for dedicated years of their life. So we're all nerds. We all love this stuff anyway. So you've got a very receptive crowd. But there's also the aspect that, especially when you're heading into the deep sea, so much of it we don't know. So almost every time we do like a dive in a new place, you end up seeing new species or something that at least you don't know about. And there's so much, I don't think we realize how diverse as well the deep sea is. There's so much life down there that when you say you're a deep sea expert, or if I say I'm a deep sea expert, what I know is, I know what a giant squid looks like, I know what a handful of other species look like, but I don't know the thousands of species of shrimp, crustaceans, copepods, fish, this. So so much of it is new. And that's so cool, because it means every time you see anything, and we've ever recorded anything in the deep sea, 90% of the time it ends up being a discussion of getting everyone around and getting the experts in to try to figure it out. And it actually creates, especially in deep sea research, a really nice feeling of kind of camaraderie, because there's only so many deep sea snail experts in the world, or deep sea crinoid experts in the world, or deep sea sponge experts in the world. So which means whenever you find something, you end up emailing some person on the other side of the world to be like, do you have any idea what this is? Have you ever seen this before? So it's even larger. That bubble of excitement is actually even larger than the people sitting in the submarine or sitting in the little kind of command center for the deep sea robots for the Nautilus. It actually kind of grows out from there, but it's always the same. We're all like
that. Firstly, every time I hear you speak, I was talking to Nathan earlier, and I feel like I've heard him talk enough that he and I have had conversations in my brain. He and I have talked, but this is one of the second times we've ever talked. And I think your energy is so infectious, and I think that's one of the things that I love so much about talking to people who are experts in their field, who are great science communicators, is that you're able to help us all feel that sense of joy and purpose and love for the ocean. So even if we live far, far from the ocean, we are now connected to it through your energy. And I think that is just such a wonderful thing. I have one last question from Bryce, which is, I think, very very timely, given that Seaspiracy has just come out. And Bryce is asking, do you eat seafood? And if so, what are your opinions on seafood? And have you seen Seaspiracy, and what are your thoughts on that? I haven't yet watched it. I know it'll be too emotionally overwhelming for me. But how do we take something like that documentary, and I'll flip this question a little bit. How do we take that something like that documentary and make actionable life changes out of it? How do we have a solutions based view of things after we watch a documentary like that?
So I'll admit this: I haven't watched Seaspiracy, so I'm hesitant to provide kind of direct comments on my opinions on
Yeah.
it, and I actively, honestly, try to steer clear a little bit away from it. But to answer the question, to be honest, do I eat seafood? Yes, I do eat seafood, but I try to eat as little as possible. A great example would be for several years before I made my recent move. I was based in the Bahamas, and in the Bahamas, I would eat lionfish. Lionfish is an invasive species in the Caribbean and now in the Mediterranean as well, and incredibly prevalent. So we would often go spearfishing for lionfish, and we'd eat lionfish. And it's kind of a way of invasive species control, but also protein production, or protein consumption. And my opinion, from what I've heard about Seaspiracy, I think it's done an amazing job of kind of getting large audiences talking about what is a huge issue. And there is no doubt in my mind that the biggest threat to ocean biodiversity today, right now, is unsustainable fisheries. So fisheries is the ultimate problem, the largest problem that our oceans are facing today. But that doesn't mean that sustainable fisheries don't exist and can't exist. We can, if managed very well, actually have sustainable fisheries. We can still have people eating seafood without having kind of these hugely destructive impacts on the ocean. This all ties down to how we fish, where we fish, what we fish, how we fish. All these things tie in. It's a very complicated question. There's no one easy answer, but there are sustainable ways to fish. But once again, just to kind of flip my discussion once more, it's key that we start reducing our dependence on seafood. And this is the same. This is what lots of documentaries just spoken about. Same with meat consumption. Lots of documentaries just talking about, do you want to do one thing right now to try to kind of make the world a better place? Stop eating meat. Move to a plant-based diet. And that's true. But just transitioning to a plant-based diet isn't going to fix every issue in the world. And the first step is just trying to reduce. We need to reduce. We need to start farming more sustainably. We need to head in that direction. But I do think there is, the same way that there are sustainable farming options, I do think there are sustainable fishing options.
I mean, I think that's a good way of saying it, and I think a good maybe way for us to sort of start to wrap up the conversation, because I know it's getting late for you on the whatever time zone you're in. I know that you're in a boggled mind, but I think that it is one of those things that we cannot make a change in our future if we can't look at it in terms of possibility. And one of my favorite things that I think I've heard you talk about is, like, if people don't know things exist under that they don't have a sense of wonder about the deep sea, or they don't have a sense of wonder about the world around us, we can't get the average person to care. And so I really appreciate your work for working in this space of giving us a sense of awe and wonder about a space that we don't get to see. Most of us can't see underwater and don't live underwater and are not diving underwater all the time. And so I love that even in that answer, it comes from a sense of possibility, right? What can we do, not what can't we do? And if we want to start making a change, we know it's not possible wholesale to get people to just all stop eating meat around the world or stop eating fish. But what we can do is find ways to do sustainable fisheries. We can find ways to make solutions. And for us, that's our way, we say, from turning from, future fatalism to a sense of fierce optimism that there is a
Mhm.
possibility out there. Um, and so just one more time, I want to make sure everybody can connect with you. Nathan, what is the best way for people to connect with you and your work and to support you and your work going forward?
The best way to support me, the best way to connect with me is by email. If you want to communicate with me directly, that's the most likely way to get a response. But the best way to follow me and support my work is to sign up to my Instagram page. And when I have new campaigns or new initiatives, I'll post on there. I'm not the most frequent poster, but every time there's something big, I make sure it's on there. So that's a great way to keep supporting my work and some of the stuff that I'm doing.
So thank you, everybody. Share, share, share. If that's one thing we learned today, it's to, we see good content in front of us, make a story, and we all have the power, and also share. Thank you so much, Nathan, for sharing your time with us, and for being a part of this happiness hour. It's been one of those hours that I've just totally absorbed, and I leave always these happiness hours feeling more elated and ready to do good in the world. So thank you for buoying all of our buoying all of our confidence the future can be a bright place. So thank you, Nathan.
Well, thank you. I have to send the thanks right back. I'm just as well, I love talking to people like the ever widening circles conspiracy goodness teams, because I find this positivity just as infectious as I guess as it works in the reverse. So I love it. It fills me with so much happiness to see that there's people out there who are trying to do such a good job, or doing such an amazing job at communicating, sharing positive stories, and getting people excited for the future. So the thanks goes right back.
All right, well, as always, we were ever grateful to have you part of our co-conspirators, Nathan. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this happiness hour. If you want to join us, we have a workshop coming up in a couple weeks featuring Kat Haber, who is going to give us some here on land, some tips that we can do to really start to make our lives more sustainable and to start having climate action solutions starting in our own home. As members of the Conspiracy of Goodness Network, you guys are all welcome to that. That's part of your membership. So we hope to see some of you guys there. And until then, I hope you're inspired by Nate and join us in our monthly goal of trying to reduce our plastic waste. I certainly am going to be a little bit more present with the plastic I'm bringing into my life for sure this month. Thank you, everybody, so much. Have a lovely evening.
Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thanks again.